Hi, everybody. I am Sonya Ballantyne, the writer and creator of the Unbeatable Sonya Ballantyne, and you are listening to the True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to celebrate Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. On this episode, I chat with Sonya Ballantyne about her new autobiographical graphic novel, The Unbeatable Sonya Ballantyne, published by HighWater Press. Please like and subscribe to this website by hitting the subscribe button so you'll be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. Sonya Ballantyne is a Swampy Cree writer, filmmaker, and speaker based in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Her work explores contemporary and futuristic portrayals of Indigenous women and girls. Her award-winning projects include the documentary Nosisim and the graphic novel Little by Little. Her newest graphic novel, featuring illustrations by Rhael McGregor, is The Unbeatable Sonya Ballantyne. In this heartfelt and often funny memoir, author Sonya gives us a look at her younger self's diary and inner life as she struggles to find herself in the pop culture she loves. Before she was a successful writer, Sonya was just another kid growing up on the res, searching for a place in the world. Her love of comics, fantasy novels, movies, and all things geeky helped her understand her life at school, her relationships with her family, and her identity. But growing up wasn't easy, and Sonya faced racism and bullying at school. Sonya takes the lessons from superhero comics to be brave in the face of adversity, to grow from strife, and to keep pushing forward towards her dreams. I should note, after the podcast interview, Sonya recommended that the following content warning be included. This podcast includes mentions of bullying, racism, and self-harm, referring to scenes in the graphic novel. For Indigenous people in Canada, support and emotional assistance is available by calling the Hope for Wellness 24/7 toll-free helpline at 1-855-242-3310. If you are in crisis in Canada or the United States, please call or text the Suicide Crisis Helpline at 988. And so, without further ado, here's my chat with Sonya Ballantyne about her new autobiographical graphic novel, The Unbeatable Sonya Ballantyne, published by HighWater Press. So, Sonya Ballantyne, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate your time. Off the top, before we started recording, I mentioned that we had chatted way in the past. You would help me with the podcast about Canadian creators at San Diego Comic-Con, but it's good to catch up now. So I do appreciate your time. And before I get going with all the questions, I would like to know, what was the first comic book that you read?
I think it was probably either an Archie comic or a Superman comic that I found randomly by my cousins who were older than me. I would love to say it was Superman for sure, but it was most likely Archie comics because I think Double Digest came like free in the mail most of the time because like they always end up in your house somehow. Like I knew a friend, she had a cabin and the cabin was filled with 70s, 60s era Archie comics. So I think it was probably Archie for sure.
I think actually leave them alone and they multiply by themselves after a while.
Yes, they're like the monsters in Gremlins. Yeah, you get them wet and the 7 or 8 appear.
That's it. Well, great inspiration when you're growing up, but I'm wondering who or what inspires you to create today?
I think what inspires me to create today is good content. And I don't mean like in terms of comic books or anything, but I just mean like in terms of as a creative and as like I've been doing this professionally probably for about 10 years now, like full time, probably 5. And one of the things you notice when you become a creative, especially when you're working professionally, is how often really good projects never get off the ground. So the fact that good projects like the movie Sinners or the television show The Pit or comic book movies like the most recent Superman ever get made is just a miracle to me. And I think that any content that makes me forget that I know the rules of how to create or the rules of storytelling, for example, if it can make me forget that I can see how the magic is done, I think that's what inspires me to create. Because you're often like, as I said, you're often getting a lot of no's, even if the project you're creating is perfect. So the fact that anything good ever makes it to the silver screen or to your hands as a reader is something that like I always marvel at. And so I guess that would be it. Like good content getting created despite how many doors are in the way.
Good stuff. Well, we're here talking about your new graphic novel, The Unbeatable Sonya Ballantyne.
Yes.
So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about it. What is the story all about?
Yeah, so basically, I always wanted to write a memoir. I was originally going to do this story in a documentary, but it never really fit until I realized that the basis of this story is ultimately the origin story of a superhero. And the origin story of a superhero was something I had basically guided my life by when I was a little girl because I had this really deep-seated belief due to a story I do mention in the graphic novel about how I thought I was Kryptonian, specifically Superman, because there was a bit in my childhood where I was reading a Superman comic in my dad's truck while we were driving. I got car sick and threw up just as we got to the part of the comic book where I was reading about kryptonite. And like kryptonite is Superman's like biggest weakness. So as my dad like stopped the truck to get me out, I was like, oh my God, I reacted to kryptonite. Therefore, I am Superman. And so that was basically what guided the story was the idea of like that story I told myself of my origins and where I came from was something that helped me deal with all the racism and sexism I dealt with as a child and like the unfairness I felt about the lottery of where I grew up because it's ultimately the story of being Indigenous in Canada and how that racism doesn't care about age or location. Like, 'cause I was 3 in the graphic novel. I was 3 when I first encountered my first racist remark from somebody, and I didn't really understand it at the time. And then I realized that was basically my Pa Kent talking to Clark about why his powers were needed and such. So ultimately, the reason I wanted to tell the story in this format was because no other format fit. And I really wanted to get really bombastic with the expressions, with the visuals, and it was ultimately easier to do it in a comic book than in a film and more cost effective because having Rhael, who was Rhael McGregor, my collaborator and the person who drew all the beautiful art in it, ultimately having them do it is way easier than trying to get like a massive $1 million budget to do some of the stuff I do in the comic book. So it was just like it felt like the right time. I feel like stories always have the perfect format for themselves and you ultimately have to find it because yes, I am a writer, but I'm also a filmmaker. And often my ideas are like, would this make a good film? But ultimately, what ends up being books for me are all my most expensive ideas.
Well, when you mention that, I understand perfectly about the numbers of people that are involved. I guess animation is maybe an in-between sort of
Oh,
stage,
yes.
perhaps?
Oh, yeah, but I also work in animation as well. Like I was recently working on the APTN children's series Chums, which is like a 3D computer animation show about this little girl and her animal friends. I think the one thing I regret about being a writer and a filmmaker this long in her career, I think what I regret is how much I know about how much budgeting goes into certain films and stuff. Because I'm like, every time I go to a movie now, I'm like, man, that must have been a lot of money, or that is a lot of money there. Or so I think I do like the idea of staying in comic books just because I love how for lack of a better word, bombastic I can get. Because I was really inspired by a lot of anime and manga when I was giving Riel the reference images for the graphic novel. And it was just something I knew I couldn't really do in a film capacity because, like, I do mention U2, I do mention Indiana Jones, I mention various superheroes. And I think it's a little bit easier to do that when you're in a book form than in a film where, like, I would have to call you two by a different name and that sort of thing. So it's like I wish I could like create something like this in a creator willing. One day I will be able to turn this graphic novel into a film because I think it would be fun. But I also think like if the life of this story is just solely in the graphic novel form, I'm totally okay with that because I'm incredibly proud of how it turned out. It's been 5 years in the making, maybe even more because I've been thinking about it since I was young. But it is still very cool to be able, like I'm holding a copy of it right now, and to have it held in my hands is still something that overwhelms me and with emotion and just feels very cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, my words don't mean anything, but congratulations. It
Ah,
is a
thanks.
great accomplishment and it definitely moved me in a way that I understand more. I think for people who want to gain more knowledge about the situation and share your experiences, I think that's a great format to do it. So that being said, what is the message you want readers to take away after reading your graphic novel?
I think ultimately that we're all heroes, we're all superheroes, and your mindset is ultimately what makes or breaks you. Because when I was growing up, I do talk about it in the graphic novel a bit about how I noticed so much apathy in the people around me when I was growing up, specifically the adults, and how the apathy kind of took people's will to live from them. And I guess what I wanted people to get from this book was ultimately that anger shouldn't be demonized, especially in Indigenous people and especially in Indigenous women, because anger was what made me decide that I was going to do what no one had ever done, and that was live my life as if I were a superhero. And I guess like what I wanted people to take from this too is ultimately like I am no one special. And like creator knows, like I heard that often enough when I was young that I didn't matter because I was a native girl, that I didn't matter at all because I grew up on a res. I guess I wanted to show specifically the little girl I was who never saw native people on the cover of the books that they liked. And I think that's ultimately why I chose a graphic novel too, rather than something like a traditional novel, because I wanted it to be accessible to people who might not read. I hate calling them actual novels, but like I wanted to make this accessible for every kid who loves Marvel movies, who loves DC movies, who sees the Superman movie that recently came out and wants a story like that about somebody like them. Because I didn't realize that when I was a little girl, that the person I needed is still needed. And if I can be that person for any little kid that was like me, I want to be that person because I learned a long time ago in this work that I do. Like I've worked on a Walking Dead video game, I've worked for Sesame Street, I've done like all kinds of really cool projects. But ultimately, I'm just a res kid. I'm a res girl. I haven't lived there since I was 17, but like I am still overwhelmed whenever I see little Indigenous kids here in my city of Winnipeg. Whenever I go do workshops with them, like the first thing they'll often say is like, she looks like my auntie or my mom. And I love that because it's like I aspired to be people like J.R.R. Tolkien and Stephen King, and I wanted to be like those writers. And I was so disheartened when I saw that J.R.R. Tolkien was university educated, Stephen King is wealthy beyond all imagination and university educated and white and living these two lived in like great cities like Bangor and London and like all these places I had never been. And the fact that I was just a kid from Grand Rapids or Mississippi, the fact that I was just that made me feel like I would never live up to those expectations I had of myself. Like, because I was like, I want to be in the same class as somebody like a Tolkien because Tolkien's work still continues to live on. And like the messages that were important to him to tell the story in the past, like specifically in Lord of the Rings, about how giving into despair is the only time you lose, was something I really wanted to include in my own work. And again, if little Sonya still exists, like the little Sonya I talk about in this book, if a girl like, well, she probably does exist, her, he or her, the kid that I was is still out there, and I wanted to write this book for them. And I hope that they feel seen, even non-Indigenous people. I hope that they feel seen in this like little weird girl's story about how she survived things that probably kids shouldn't have to survive, like racism and sexism. Like, because ultimately, I was worried about putting that stuff in here because I thought it might be too adult. But then I was like, even if it is too adult, it shouldn't have happened to a child, and it's probably still happening to children now, especially with, we were talking off camera, especially with the way the world is right now, where people are having this idea of us versus them. I wanted to make sure that this book was seen as like somebody connecting with other people. Because that's ultimately what comic books and what art is just like the ability to show someone else your experience. Because ultimately, you and I and anybody, we don't know what it is like to experience life as each other, and we only have art to connect us. And so I guess I wanted to make sure that no little kid ever felt as lonely as I did looking to Superman as the only source of them mattering, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, well said. So you just mentioned Superman. You do mention some other superheroes in your graphic novel, but that's when you were growing up. I'm wondering, do you identify with any superheroes now?
I still think I identify the most with Superman, specifically the most recent version, because I have always been drawn specifically to Superman and Batman. Like Superman and Batman are kind of like my love for Star Wars and Star Trek. Like Superman and Star Trek are who I aspire to be and who I will always be aiming for. This idea of the person always knowing the right thing to say, always knowing the right thing to do, and always knowing what is right. Whereas I'm more like a Batman and a Star Wars person. Like the world is cruddy, the world is dark, but there's still people who have been hurt who are making the world better. And I've always been drawn specifically to that in Batman because Batman had this terrible thing happen to him, and he ultimately wanted to make sure that no child would ever go through what he did. And I love that about him because even though like we can go into the adult specifics about how he has PTSD and it's probably not good for him to be that obsessed with the past, but I always was drawn to that because ultimately what drew me to these heroes was their flaws and the idea that despite their flaws they still wanted to do good. And I guess that's why I really like Superman, especially the most recent one, because the Superman of the modern era is flawed. The Superman of a modern era was sent here to be, spoiler alert for the Superman movie, but sent here to be a dictator and is horrified by that idea of this is who I was meant to be and it's a lie. So I really connected with that, especially now that I'm an adult and an artist too. I guess that's what was so healing about writing this graphic novel was because I dreamed of the type of person I wanted to grow up to be. I dreamed of the person I hoped I would get to grow up to be. There was a lot of dark things in my past, like specifically around suicide and self-harm and stuff like that. I didn't get too much into the self-harm part in the book, but like it was a big part of my teenage years. And what kept me going was the idea that Superman is this person that cares about everybody in the world, and that includes me in all my flaws and all my things I don't like about myself. And I guess that's what I was really drawn to. But I also am incredibly obsessed with Green Lantern. I am so annoyed that the worst Green Lantern in the comic books is the best on-screen one we've had, like Guy Gardner. I
Oh,
was so annoyed because I didn't want to like him because I was like, oh, why are they making Guy the one that they're gonna put into the films? And then I'm like, damn it, he was good. But I also really love the idea of Green Lantern because their power is their might, like their will to do good. And I guess that's something that I always was drawn to with these heroes was that it's not the power, it's the choice to do something to change your circumstances, your world. And I guess that's what continues to inspire me about these heroes is that idea that our choices are what make us who we are, not our backgrounds, not our circumstances, not our parents. Because I am currently estranged from my parents. It's my choice. And that's something I don't mention in the book. And people will often be surprised by that because they're like, oh, but you present your parents in such a beautiful way within your graphic novel. And that was intentional because the memories I put of my parents in this graphic novel are the ones I want to remember. The ones where I'm like, this is who my mother was when she was at her best. This is who my father was when he was at his best. And ultimately, superheroes don't have terrible parents. And so I also wanted to include that. And ultimately, I think I still strive to be Superman, even though I'm still going to be a Batman for the rest of my life.
okay, okay.
Hopefully as rich as him, though. Like, here's hoping.
Sure, sure. Now, you mentioned your collaborator before, Rhael McGregor. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the creative process. How did
Oh,
you
yeah.
two work together to create this graphic novel?
So I have worked with Rhael on my graphic novel Little by Little, which is a biography of the activist Michael Champagne, who's based out of Winnipeg. Really great guy. And Rhael's art was something I was super drawn to. I loved her self-published graphic novel. I guess it's kind of a manga as well. She wrote this manga called I Learned of Love from Shoshan Manga, I think it was called. And I really loved her art. I really loved the vulnerability she showed in that. And that was something I knew I wanted to bring to this graphic novel. And the collaborative process was very simple. I would let them know, okay, I want this to look anime as hell. Like, I want the expressions to be big. There's a scene where I'm trying to convince my mother in the graphic novel to let me go to this Bible camp. And Rhael drew me, like, I didn't include this one, but Rhael drew me with like a fake halo, like my hands in prayer and a little angel outfit. And then when my mom reveals in the story, you only want to go to this camp because of horses and bows and arrows, right? And I was like, right. And then my halo breaks. I just love that. But I also would share a lot of reference images in regards to like movies I liked or comic book imagery. There's a scene in the graphic novel where I talk about my own birth. And a lot of that was inspired by Superman, the 70s Superman, the Christopher Reeve one. I also mentioned a lot of Indiana Jones. I would send her that stuff. And yeah, like it was a lot of references. Like I recently came across the reference images I sent her, and each page has like at least four movie or comic book images that I wanted her to look at. I was really inspired by Batwoman Elegy just because of the layout of their panels. Because I am so terrible about paneling in my own writing that I was like, okay, we're going to make weird panels or as weird as I can make weird panels. And Rhael was just so up for it. I really, really was glad to work with them on here because I think they knew exactly what I was going for. They were able to not assume, but they were able to predict where I wanted to go. And it was also very, very emotionally overwhelming in a very positive way when she gave me the first reference images for what the people in the story would look like, because my grandparents were incredibly important to me. And when Rhael sent me the images of them as they would appear in the ages I was in this part of the story, it felt so good to see my grandparents again in that way. And so I was really thankful for Rhael for that because it was just so overwhelming and it was just like such a good gift to my heart. So I'm really sad because Rhael and I were supposed to work on another graphic novel that's forthcoming, but they ultimately decided that they weren't the artists for it. But I'm hoping to work with them in the future, specifically if I do continue in film, I would love to do an animation with them. I would love to do an Indigenous manga. I don't know how that would look. I don't know what that would be about, but I'm like, I'm always inspired by the art of other countries and the art of other pop cultures that might not be Western. And so, like, Rhael was really somebody that was a really good outlet for that. And that's why I really enjoy working with them.
Nice. We've been talking about the Unbeatable Sonya Ballantyne. I'm wondering, can you talk about your next project? Will there be another graphic novel?
Well, I was thinking of it's always been my dream to write an Angela's Ashes style memoir. I always wanted to write like a book like The Perks of Being a Wallflower, the kind of book that weirdos, and I mean that in the best possible way, weirdos and like people who feel outside the margins would be drawn to. But my most official next up project is a graphic novel about I Don't Know More, the Indigenous movement. I'm working on that right now. It should be published probably next year. It's untitled right now, but it's something I was really happy to work on. Just they didn't want a history book. They wanted something that was, again, accessible to an audience that might not know anything about that time in history and how it continues to this day. But it's something I knew I wanted to put all I could into it because I'm like, this could be something big. I really am excited to look at that. I just finished being the writer in residence at the University of Manitoba. I am looking to pitch a Goosebumps style young adult book called Precious Silver. And it's about these twins who solve paranormal mysteries on their reserve for their YouTube channel while dealing with YouTube trolls. I always really was drawn to the idea of writing an Animorph style book, so I think that might become my series. I'm drawn to horror. A lot of horror for children is not there the way it was when I was young. Like I've always been drawn to like baby's first horrors. So I'm thinking about how I would do an age appropriate horror for teens and for kids. Because I notice how many kids love horror right now. Like my nephew at the time was about 5 or 6, and he was obsessed with Pennywise the clown. He was obsessed with it, but he had never seen or read the book or the movie. And I'm like, well, how do you know Pennywise? Like your daddy wouldn't let you watch that. And he's like, oh yeah, I saw it on Roblox. And like, and what I found from these kids mentioning that sort of thing was that kids are drawn to stories where adults are useless ultimately, and it's the kids who are the heroes. And so I'm really drawn to that idea of writing a teen horror or youth horror, and so I'm pitching that right now. But yeah, the I don't know more one is the one that's coming up the fastest. My next project is at the Winnipeg Fringe Festival in July 2026. I'm presenting a spoken word piece titled How Bono Saved My Life 3 Times, and it's specifically about each time I was going to end my life at age 13, at age 23, and most recently at age 37, and how each time my love for and obsession with the band U2 brought me back. And it kind of was inspired by my work on the graphic novel, but I'm really excited to show it because storytelling has always been something I wanted to do. And writing has always been something I wanted to do. And the chances I get and the opportunities I get to do that have been so abundant, and I'm really glad to see how many people are interested in hearing these stories. And ultimately I am so shocked, and I love that people connect to it, because ultimately I thought when I wrote these stories that only Indigenous girls would connect with them, but that hasn't been the case. Well, that has been the case. Yes, Indigenous girls love it. But like the fact that people of multiple backgrounds, like trans girls, boys, I remember these Somali girls were like really connected to my story. And I was like, wow, like it's really cool to see how much people can find themselves, even if we're not the same. And I just love that.
Well, it sounds like you got a lot on the go. I'm wondering, where do you recommend that people go online to find out more about what you're doing today and tomorrow?
Oh yeah, like you can follow me at Instagram on Sonya_Ballantyne. I also post a lot on Threads now. I'm very happy to be doing that because I ultimately left the Twitter platform because of basically how it was becoming the Fourth Reich, for lack of a better word. Like I'm a bit of a culture critic, so I love talking about the shows I'm watching, the books I'm reading. So if you wanted to hear me talk a little bit more about that, you can follow me on Threads. Same username as Instagram. Sonya_Ballantyne, but be sure to be caught up on episodes of The Pit because I tend to talk spoilers about that show a lot and talk about how much medical knowledge I have because I'm like, even though I'm not a doctor, I think I could find my way around that hospital.
Thanks to Sonya for the chat. You can discover more about Sonya online at sonyaballantyne.com and on Instagram at Sonya_Ballantyne. You can discover more about the Unbeatable Sonya Ballantyne on HighWater Press. And thank you for tuning in to the True North Country Comics podcast. I invite you to visit the True North Country Comics website to listen to even more conversations with creators about making comic books and graphic novels. I encourage you to subscribe via the website so you'll be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can follow along True North Country Comics on most social media platforms. And you're encouraged to send any and all feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks for tuning in, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2026.